Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look for ways we can work together to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ in our community and throughout the world. Today we have with us Pastor Mike Morrison. He's the lead pastor of Collin Creek Church in Plano, Texas. And Mike, you have quite a background, don't you, as far as how you came to pastor Collin Creek?
I sure do. It was a long and windy road getting to Texas for sure.
So tell us, you weren't always, from the beginning, you weren't kind of a full-time pastor, were you? What kind of work did you do before you started pastoring?
Well, I've been in full-time, I say full-time ministry. I've been in ministry for over 30 years. I served bivocationally that entire time, except for these past 3 years that I've been at Collin Creek. I began working in youth ministries. I was saved Free Will Baptist. I went to then it was Free Will Baptist Bible College, FWB as we called it back then, and I went back to my home state of West Virginia. I worked with small churches intentionally. I went into churches that couldn't afford me, and I trained youth leaders. Back then they were youth pastors. Trained them. I started ministries in churches. I would stay short-term until those leaders were trained, and then I would move on. I started pastoring. I pastored a non-denominational church, was my first official pastorate. I had served as an interim pastor for about a year. But my first official pastorate, I served there for 10 years. I went on to plant a church, and then I co-pastored a church in a small town in Ohio with a friend of mine. And the entire time I was working, I started out working in newspaper. That's where I spent about 15 years in newspaper. I started out as a inside sales rep. I went on to become an outside sales rep, working with customers locally, and then I became a national sales rep. So now I'm working with companies like Kroger and JCPenney's. I went on to become an executive leader inside the corporation. It was a conglomerate of newspapers nationwide. I was a regional advertising director there, and then I served on the board of the Ohio Newspaper Network for a while. And then I was recruited into healthcare. And so I went to work in the healthcare space, which was good at the time. I was in my late 30s, and newspapers were really starting to decline in the country. So I was trying to think long term. I got into healthcare. That's actually what brought me to Texas. I was working for a healthcare company. They recruited me to turn around their sales model, which we were able to do. I went on to manage one of their centers. I did sales and operations management for them. And then they moved me into a regional manager's position. That brought me to the great state of Texas. You know, my wife, Dr. Moody, my wife always told me, she said, and she got into this knowing that she was going to be a pastor's wife. And she said to me, "I'll follow you to the ends of the earth, just not Texas." She had a bad experience here. So the day I'll never forget the day I called her and told her that they were wanting me to move to Texas. And she surprised me. She said, "Well, if that's what you think God's leading you to do." Yeah. And so she came with me, her and my daughter, and I was pastoring at the time. It was the first time in my entire life that I'd made a decision that wasn't driven by pastoral ministry. My day job was offering me an opportunity, and I felt God was in it. And I came here a little bit unaware of what God was going to do with me ministry-wise. And so I was able to plug into a good-sized local church here, and not realizing that there was a Free Will Baptist church. But my daughter started working with American Heritage Girls. She became a member of that wonderful organization, and they were meeting at a Free Will Baptist church. It was a church plant here in McKinney, one of our mission churches. And next thing I know, I'm on staff there as the administrative pastor. And after moving the operations of that church to Princeton, Texas, I served there for a few more months, and then got the call to Collin Creek Church in Plano.
And Plano is a different kind of place. So you've got, within a 15-minute drive of your church, you have 618,189 people.
And it's growing every single day.
People moving to Texas. We've heard a little bit about that.
But Collin County, in fact, is the fastest growing county right now in the United States. It's really incredible, the number of people that are moving to Texas right now.
So it's pretty cool. It really is kind of for such a time as this situation.
Indeed.
Church finds you're right in the midst of this growing boom, and it's a little bit of a different kind of a population. There's native Texans that are in your area, but there's also all kinds of different folks. I think we did the Know Your Community, and you had groups like the Boom Burbs, Metro Fusion, Bright Young Professionals, an interesting group, Parks and Rec, and the Knee West residents, which makes sense. You are in the West.
Yeah.
But some of those are a little bit harder for Free Will Baptist historically to have reached with the gospel. So what have you all been doing there at Collin Creek, trying to help these folks find Jesus?
Yeah. And, we're like a lot of churches right now, Dr. Moody. COVID, in many ways, the pandemic threw the church, broadly speaking, for a loop. And, like many churches, it presented struggles. We had additional struggles on top of that. We had one of the worst winter storms in the history of the state back in 2021. That caused about $50,000, $52,000 in damage to our facilities. So on top of everything that we're dealing with, trying to recover from the pandemic, we had some facility issues that we're really close to finally resolving. In fact, we're coming up on a big celebration here really soon. So we turned our sights to the community this past year in a really big way. We have the pleasure, really it's a privilege, to be situated between two very different communities. One of those communities is largely Hispanics, Spanish speaking. They're generally lower income, predominantly Catholic. And then right across Parker Road is another community that's, kind of your typical mix of Texans. We're 1 mile from one of the busiest highways in the state of Texas. So we're in a really great spot, but our church campus overlooks a beautiful little park called Shawnee Park. And I being a kid at heart, I had an idea one day. I'm an introvert. And why in the world God would call an introvert is beyond me, but he did. And so I'm not the most outgoing guy in the world. I tend to stick to myself. I'm the quiet guy over in the corner in a lot of situations, but I knew that I needed to get down there into that park that's just full of people almost all the time and engage. And so I had this crazy idea one day. There's a pond in the park, and I said to my wife, it would be really great if I were to get a little speedboat and take it down there and run it around the pond. I said, I think it would engage people when they would actually come to me, and instead of me going around awkwardly trying to introduce myself to people. I think she was a little skeptical at first, Dr. Moody. I think she thought, oh boy, he's trying to get a toy out of me, which, I have to admit that was in the back of my mind. So we go and for my birthday, her and my daughter got me a little speedboat. So I got one of these, and you can't see the writing on it, but it's the brand name. It says Alpha Rev, which I thought was, kind of appropriate. And so
you can't make that up.
I can't make it up. So I take the boat down, we put it in the water, and within 5 minutes, these two Asian American ladies come up, and they start a conversation. And I said, "Are you from here in the community?" They said, "Yeah, we live right over there." They pointed to one of the communities, and I said, "Oh," and they're like, "Are you from here?" And I said, "Well, I pastor that church right there," and of course, pointing across the pond to our beautiful campus. And "Oh, you're the pastor there?" And I said, "Yeah." And so I get an invite card and I invite them to church, and they thank me and walk away. And just as they're walking away, here comes a man and his little girl. And she wants to see the boat. So I give her the control, and she's able to play with the boat. And I'm talking to him, and he said, "Oh, I'm not from this community. I'm from nearby in Wiley." "Oh, I've got a family in my church who lives in Wiley." And he's like, "Oh, where do you go to church?" I said, "Well, I'm the pastor of that church right over there. Here's an invite card." I turned to my wife as they were walking away, and she says, "We need more boats."
Yeah. That's right. That's right. But with Know Your Community, we're always stressing where people are at, going to where people are at, doing it. And you couldn't just walk around and say, "Hey," well, you could, but "Hey, here's an invite card to my church," but it wouldn't have the effect of what you're doing would have.
Yeah, absolutely. And the heart of the gospel, Jesus said, "Go." And so the days of sitting inside our four walls expecting people to show up, I think those days are gone. And so we've got to find creative ways to go. And this was just one of many creative ways that we've kind of come up with to try and engage people in a way that's not threatening. They are actually coming to me rather than me going to them. And we've had some people visit our church as a result of me throwing the boat in the water and taking her around. So then all glory to God.
There you go. And so you and your church are realizing our church is not where it's at by accident.
Yes.
Where you're put in a particular place in a particular time. And so you're trying to encourage them to think about what they might do to reach the gospel. And as a result, you're doing a lot of creative things to try to engage your community and meet them and invite them to come in and be and to hear the gospel there in your church.
Yeah. And I'm a coffee snob. And when I say that, I mean that Starbucks is terrible coffee. But we do have, being in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro, we've got some pretty amazing coffee places. And in fact, in Plano, very near our church, is a really great place called 1418 Coffee. Gets its name because that's its address, 1418 K Avenue. And so I'm a regular fixture down there. I go down and I purposely do things while I'm there to try and get people to engage me in conversation. I've got a Star Trek bag that gets lots of comments. People recognize it and they're like, "Oh, Star Trek," and that's the beginning of a conversation. And so I'm just anywhere I can go to engage people. And actually the great thing is they end up engaging me. And I think it's following the model that Jesus left us. He changed people's lives by what he preached. Yes. But how he really changed people's lives was by entering into their lives. He engaged people where they were at. And so we're trying the best we can to follow his model.
That's good. So the scripture says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. So there are extroverts, there are introverts.
Indeed.
People that like boats, people that don't, people that like Star Trek, people that don't. So it looks like what you have done is taken your skill set, your gifts, and you have found ways to use those to reach people with the gospel. And I got to say this, Mike, you don't see that many pastors with the kind of microphone get up and all that. We don't see that a lot on the Better Together podcast. So it looks like something's happening there. You've got a podcast, and I feel like I see a book off to our right, but it's off to your left. There's some sort of science fiction thing happening over there in Plano, isn't there?
Yeah, for sure. And it just goes back to to my childhood. I'm a voracious reader, and my introduction to reading was science fiction. So I've always been a lover of science fiction. And the great thing about the way God makes us and the passions that He gives us, oftentimes we look at these things and, well, that's not compatible with the church, and really it is. God creates us each uniquely, and my passion for science fiction's really opened up opportunities for me. I started a podcast several years ago because of my love of Star Trek. And when people think of Star Trek, they think, well, that's atheism and godlessness. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, was a Southern Baptist at one time, and he walked away from his faith. But when he created Star Trek, he wanted to create a wagon train to the stars kind of story. And in creating this world, his roots of faith kind of made its way into it. And so I'm actually a co-host of a podcast on Star Trek and philosophy. My co-host is an academic philosophy professor. And so we sit down and we talk for an hour about philosophy through the lens of Star Trek. And I've been able to bring those conversations back to the gospel, pointing at things within the Star Trek universe that can kind of hook to things that we can find in our Bibles. I've had the pleasure of leading 3 people to Christ as a result of those conversations, people whose eyes were open to the gospel because of a Star Trek podcast. And of course, beyond podcasting, I've always loved writing. And my wife teases me that it was my midlife crisis, but I wrote a manuscript several years ago, 2015. And I was able to sell that manuscript to a publisher. So I'm a published science fiction fantasy author. I wrote a book called Hannah Goodhart and the Guardian of Time. It's about a teenage girl who finds a small object as she's out stargazing with friends. And, it opens up the opportunity for her to travel through time and space. And she encounters things that she thought she would never see. Within the story, we deal with a lot of situations and things that, you wouldn't necessarily directly connect to the gospel. People who've read it have likened it to C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia trilogy. I'm no C.S. Lewis, but I certainly appreciate the wonderful comments that I've gotten about it. We make no bones in that universe that there's a creator. So it's great. And I've been able to go out and do podcasts like this. In fact, we just did one, a podcast, literary podcast. I go to book events, schools, book festivals, and it's great because it gives me an opportunity to not just talk about science fiction, and I'm an advocate for just picking up books and reading, but I'm able to talk a little bit about the gospel as well in the context of a science fiction story.
That's pretty cool. So these interests that you have, this particular way that God's made you, you've been able to take that and use it in a variety of ways with hobbies where you've been able to engage people with the gospel. And then in probably a more direct way, even with the writing, with some of the themes, we should say these are very wholesome characters, that you're writing about. So it's at the surface, it looks like just clean fun, just good, nice reading, and that you don't have to worry about letting your kids read. But beyond it, there are those themes that can engage them, even like, Lewis tried with Chronicles of Narnia and all. You're trying to do that same kind of thing in this genre. So it's good stuff, Mike. And it just shows you're multidimensional as well.
Yeah, I've got a lot of interests, that's for sure.
Well, I know you're a busy man. I appreciate you taking the time to share with us today. I'm hoping our listeners will get a couple of takeaways from this. And one, I'm just going to put out there, you were bivocational for a long time. In fact,
Yes.
Until 3 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So almost you've been doing ministry while working. So there's one thing. The other thing is you may not be what the typical person thinks of as a pastor, but you're called into the pastorate, and you as an introvert have been able to reach people with the gospel and just figure out, how to do that. I think that's pretty cool. We used to say a lot, extroverts say a lot, introverts say it better. And so you're kind of doing that a little bit with your writing, and you don't have to say as much with your boat. People come to you. And then you've got this other avenue, almost like your other job before, but where it's an outlet for you. It probably helps you be creative.
Yeah.
But it's also another way to engage people in different environments to reach them with the gospel. So it's a pretty good life kind of woven together there, my friend.
Yeah, and it's just critical, and even for full-time pastors. And I talk to guys all the time that are full-time pastors, and I just encourage them, get a side hustle, a hobby, something to get you outside of the four walls of your church, and just engage people, because again, Jesus changed people's lives, yes, by the things that he preached and taught, but it was the fact that he was able to enter into people's lives. That's how he was able to change them. And he's done that for each of us. There was a day in my life when he entered my life, and it profoundly changed, not just me in that moment, but the entire trajectory of my life, and not only my life, but the lives of the people who I've encountered over the years. My daughter right now is a student at Randall University, and she's studying intercultural studies. She is called to be a missionary, and I have no doubt that one of these days God's going to take her to the other side of the world. And I've tried to instill that into her. She's as introverted as I am, but how important it is that we find ways to enter people's lives, because that's where we make the difference. And
we should also point out your community is kind of wired that way too. So the people that you're trying to reach with the gospel, it is more of a relationship kind of thing. And some of them are not exactly thrilled, or sometimes have some aversion initially to the gospel. You wouldn't think so in Texas, but when you look at that makeup of the people who are moving in there, it takes the kind of thing you guys are doing there, to have a relationship with them before you get the opportunity really to, it's almost like fishing. It's a little bit.
Yeah. And Bob Shockey taught me a long time ago that, when you're fishing, sometimes you've got to change the lure up a little bit. And I'll never forget, he told me sometimes you got to change the lure up a little bit. And so I've tried to apply that, because again, you're right. The typical Texan doesn't really exist here in Texas anymore. Folks are coming from areas like California, and they're very closed to the gospel. So it's about building relationships and earning the right to share the gospel with them.
And God's brought them to our doorstep.
Yeah.
So it's for a reason. And so it's a unique opportunity that many of our churches are getting as well, wherever they may be.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mike, for
thank you
trying to share with us today. It's good to get a little glimpse of the inside picture there of your life and how the Lord is taking you and using you.
Thank you, Dr. Moody.
I want to encourage you, our listeners, check out some of Mike's books if you can. Mike, where's a good place for them to check that out?
Hannah Goodheart and the Guardian of Time is available everywhere you buy books. You can get it at Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble. If you can't find it in your local bookstore, ask them to order it. They can get it from Ingram's, the largest distributor of books in the country. Those are the best places to find it. And I do want to say too, hey, if you're looking for opportunities out there, I would be a fool not to take the opportunity and just say, we've got them aplenty here, and we're looking for people who are harvest minded to come and partner with us, because people are moving here every day, and we need everyone we can to share Christ.
It's good. So you've been wanting to move to Texas, go to Plano. You've been wanting to do graduate school, Dallas Baptist University, right? And they just changed the name.
Right around the corner.
Around the corner, as well as other, basically any kind of program you would like, you could get in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So it'd be a good way to do studies if you're a younger person wanting to study something and help out with the church here as well. A good way to do that.
Yeah.
Good way to do that. So good job, Mike. The other thing you may be thinking, how can I learn more about my community? Email us at questions@nafwb.org. We can talk to you about the Know Your Community profile that you can get, ways to think about what you might be able to do to especially reach people that are a little bit different than maybe some of the other folks in your church. So take advantage of that if you can. Hey, thanks again, Mike, for joining us today, my friend.
Thank you, Dr. Moody.
We want to thank you, our listener, for joining us today. Please take this podcast, share it with someone else. If you can, write us a review on Facebook or wherever you're listening to your particular podcast. Remember, every little bit helps, and we truly are better when we work together.